Welcome to Thrive Deeper, an ongoing conversation with Dr. Matthew Jacoby, author of the Thrive Bible Reading Guides, teaching pastor and leader of the Psalmist band Sons of Korah. Join us as we go deeper into the Bible, discussing the passages as we read them together with Thrive. Now here's your host, DJ Payne.
Welcome to episode 39 of Thrive Deeper, your accompaniment podcast to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide. It's your host here, DJ Payne, and on this week's episode, Matthew and I are jumping into that first third of the book of Proverbs, and we're going to cover some questions. We're going to get into the very fascinating topic of work and finances and how they go together, and how do we find satisfaction in all of that. I know it's one you're going to want to listen to, so grab your Bible, grab your Thrive, grab your pen and paper, and join with us after the break. We'll get into it. The book of Proverbs, this is Thrive Deeper. I know you wear a lot of hats, Matt, and at the moment, I guess one of the hat you've been wearing quite a while. I don't know what style of hat it would be. Maybe it's more of a robe or a head, some sort of head covering.
I don't know where you're going with this.
Well, it's the Sons of Korah hat.
Oh, the Sons of Korah hat.
Because you've done 2 live shows with the new muso. You've got a new member of the team. Yeah. And I know that the beginning of songwriting, recording, sketches are being put down for the next Sons of Korah project.
Yeah, they are. It's a hat that I sometimes forget about because I do wear other hats, but I was thinking the other day how much I enjoy it when it because it's intermittent. Yeah, it comes out, and then I sort of don't think about it, and then I think, we've got a tour coming up, and I'm really still excited to get out there and play music, because at the end of the day, I love playing music. Yeah. And to be able to play with great musos and in great situations, that's the privilege that I have to do that as well, and put on top of that, as well as the ministry dynamic and playing these sorts of songs, which in our case is the Psalms. I love it. And I love the composition element too. Yeah. Even just working away at that lately, I love how these Psalms just fall into music, and how much the music actually magnifies the emotion of the psalm. So I really love that creative process.
Well, I know we have a lot of Sons of Korah fans listening, and, and we have people who have no idea who Sons of Korah is, and that's great. But you're working on, is it the 9th or 10th album?
Ninth studio album.
Ninth studio album. Yeah. Give us a sneak peek. What's coming up? What have we got?
Well, the one I'm most excited about is Psalm 88, which is the dark. It's known as a very dark psalm, but I just think it's an exceptionally beautiful psalm. Actually, I mean, it's a real lament, and it's in a situation of just abject kind of hopelessness in one sense, and yet there is a strong light of hope in it, in the very cry to God, and the faith with which the psalmist actually shapes that cry. So I've tried to really bring out that light in the darkness in that psalm and the music.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't
giving
wait.
it lots of space, and it's probably like it's one of those psalms that I think I'll probably give 4 tracks to.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. An entire, like in the old thinking, an entire side of a vinyl record is dedicated to one psalm.
Something like that.
Yeah. I remember, and again, we're going down nostalgia lane here, and we'll get to Proverbs. Trust me, we'll get to Proverbs. When I was there at the beginning, running a record label with Stuart Duncan. You're now, your manager still now. And we started a record label, and our first signing was Sons of Korah. We were so stoked about it. And being there for your first album recording in Geelong, and I would often joke with you and the then members of the team. I would say, you know what, Psalm 88, Psalm 88.
I know, yeah, you've been saying that for a while.
And I remember you guys just sort of feigning like, oh, how would we do it? Like, so, and it's amazing. 20 years later or 20 something years later, you guys are like, we're ready.
Yeah, but the thing is, I was actually working on it back then, that long ago, even before we recorded Light of Life, which was in 98.
Yeah.
Even a couple of years before that, I can remember working on probably as early as 95, 96. I can remember working on Psalm 88.
Wow.
Because I just found it such a moving psalm.
It is. It's a beautiful psalm. Well, we're not talking about psalms. We're just one book over talking about Proverbs. When Sons of Korah finally finish all the psalms, maybe you'll work on the book of Proverbs. But we're sailing through the book of Proverbs. I, for one, am absolutely loving going through it again, reading it over and over again, especially with my family. And I'm appreciating it in a whole new way. And I sort of feel a little bit guilty that I haven't been reading it to my boys aloud, for a long, long time, this is sort of the first time at their ages, the oldest is 15, the youngest is 10, that I'm able to go through it and sort of speak to them in the way that I feel that Solomon was speaking to his children. Yeah.
It is an amazing book, and I hope for our listeners, I hope that you've been reading through it. And, of course, this podcast is designed to go together with the Thrive Daily Bible Reading Guide. And so do encourage you to follow those readings because it really is there really is some classic stuff in there. And, do we have any questions? I was wondering whether we have any questions actually.
Perfect timing. I'm just pulling up the questions now. We've got a couple of questions, and the questions are from our Facebook group. And keep on listening at the end of the episode. Benita, the lovely voiceover lady, at the end of the episode will give you all the links to all of that. But we've had Meg Thompson has jumped in there and given us a question.
Okay.
And she says, there's a lot of my child and my son going on in the book of Proverbs. Is this God talking to Solomon or is it Solomon talking to his child? How are we supposed to, take it? And if it was Solomon talking to his son or his sons, who are they? Do we know anything about them?
Yeah, the last one is an interesting one because his son Rehoboam, who became the king after him, was one of the biggest fools in the history of the kings. He really is quite foolish in the end, which is a kind of funny little juxtaposition. And it may well be that he was a bit of a spoilt brat, Rehoboam, because as you know, in the latter part of Solomon's life, he puts enormous efforts into wealth building.
Yes.
And so it may well be that his son actually goes off the track because of that. But that sort of voice, actually, that father to son voice in the Proverbs, I think is indicative of more than that. I think it's a stylistic thing. It's not just that Solomon was writing them for his son. It's a stylistic thing because it's the Proverbs themselves are this. They are they encapsulate God's wisdom for everyday life, and they're the classic wisdom that you pass on to the next generation, so that it may go well with them.
Fantastic.
And it's sort of shaped. The Proverbs are kind of for that. Like, this is education. Let's educate our kids. Let's make sure they get all these principles of life. And so, I think that is that father to son voice that we see in the Proverbs indicates how the Proverbs were seen and probably used in their time as this tool for passing on principles of life to the next generation.
This that's great. I hope, Meg, that answers your question. I thought you answered that fantastically, Matt, because in that first sort of third of the book of Proverbs, it is all the speeches, from Solomon to his son. Yeah. I think there's, depending on how you count them, 10 different, or I've heard 9 different, I've heard 11, I've heard different ways of counting the speeches of Solomon. We get at least 3 or 4 speeches from the female persona of wisdom itself, speaking as well in that first section. And it is definitely, it's definitely something that I've thought about. And someone asked me recently, knowing that we're going through Proverbs, is how do we read Proverbs? Are these, how did they word it? Basically asking, are these promises? Like God's word is promise that we take and we do this. And I said, well,
it's a good question.
And we had a big, long discussion on that, because I, to cut a very long answer down the short, I would say, I don't know if these are promises that you can hold on to and say, if I've raised my child in the way of the Lord, he will not depart from it. My child has wandered off and says they do not believe in God in it, but I am believing and standing on this
based
promise.
On that,
And I'm like,
it's a very good point, because the Proverbs don't operate like that. They are maxims for everyday life of the way that things generally work. It's like, this is the way that things work. So, it's like akin to saying, if you plant a tomato seed, a tomato plant will grow. Yeah. Well, personally, I've planted lots of tomato plants and they've all died, but that's not the point. It's like, if you do this, this will, as a sort of a general rule in life, they are statements about how life works, how things work generally, so they're not promises, as you say, in that sense, but descriptions of reality.
Like a guiding principle. I read something, and forgive me, I cannot remember where it was. Two factors here that I ended up talking about. Number one factor is, this is not a book that sits by itself on the shelf. The book of Proverbs sits with Job, and it sits with Ecclesiastes. And those two other books are for understanding that these aren't promises. Because Job did the things right, and God says,
that's right,
doesn't happen like that.
That's a very good point.
Ecclesiastes is the man of wisdom and everything else, going, I've seen it all. Doesn't always go like that book of Proverbs says. And I think we need to take all of those three into consideration.
Well, in a sense, the book of the teacher in Ecclesiastes is saying all of the things that because the Proverbs talks about, if you do this, it'll go well and you'll be, and the writer of Ecclesiastes, almost he gets all of those blessings, but he says these things on their own are meaningless.
Yes.
That life is bigger than this. So that there's that bigger perspective. It's really interesting, actually, to recognise actually the distinct voices of the different wisdom books, and to be very sensitive to what they're doing and not doing. I think that's, because it's like Job is not a normative statement about how we can expect God to work in our lives, or it's this drama that unfolds that deals with these big questions of suffering, and Ecclesiastes also is not statement. It's not saying that all of these things are just meaningless, and well, it is saying that, but the point is that apart from God, on their own, consider on their own, all of these things really come to nothing. They wind us up, kind of. They're all a bit of a dead end. And so we should focus on obeying and walking with God. So there's a distinct voice, and that's very much the case with the Proverbs.
And I think the other can be argued as well. The flip side is true. If we just had Job and we just had Ecclesiastes, we'd be like, whoa, this is really. But Proverbs help, like Proverbs, like those three books together, to me is such a work of God that he's saying, and this is the other part of the conversation I ended up having, that the wisdom personified in Proverbs, and the Proverbs themselves as these maxims and the way of life, is an invitation to step into how God has wired the universe.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and we're entering into the best probability of things happening.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
And this is the way that I've wired things to go. I want you to step in and plug yourself into these things. But beware, life isn't simple.
That's right. Yeah,
Life
As
isn't
the
easy.
Book of Job, and that's where the Book of Job comes in. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and in fact, it's good because like it's kind of wonderfully practical. Like, let me give you an example. A classic one is, if I just have enough faith, like God is gonna care for all my needs, and and indeed, seek first the kingdom of God, and all of these other things will be given to you as well. And so there can be. You could take this approach that, well, I'm just going to trust God, and as long as I have enough faith, I'll have everything that I need. Now, that's very true, but the Proverbs come in and say, yeah, but if you don't work, you can't expect anything. It's like this beautifully practical, but that's not an excuse for laziness.
Yeah.
And it's a classic because you get some people that perhaps might use that as an excuse for well, I'm just going to trust God and sit on a hill and meditate and pray and expect, the Lord to shower down everything if a little folding of the hands, a little nodding of the head, and poverty will come upon you in an instant.
Yeah. Have you considered the ant, you sluggard?
Yeah, that's right. So there's this really practical kind of wisdom that I think we need.
Yeah. I love that. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back in a moment and we'll get into the next question, which I think will lead us into the next part of Proverbs really, really well. You're listening to Thrive Deeper with DJ Payne and Matt Jacoby. We're back and we're looking at the book of Proverbs. Matt, there's another question that's come in via the Facebook group, and it is from good old Chris Maddock. And Chris says that just recently in the Thrive's message has been about generosity. And he said, it's reminded me that being generous with money is one thing, but being generous with your time and your resources, not just money, is not often commented on in the church. And he said, look, I know a lot of generous people, and I know some generous people who are poor, they give of their time and their resources. But I know other people who are very rich and they give out of the checkbook's open, no worries, but they're never going to spend any time with you or do anything like that. And he said, what is real generosity according to Proverbs?
That's a very good question. I like it.
Chris is
I
good.
really like it. Yeah, it's a good point because it gets down to the heart attitude. It's not because you could have lots of money and just hand out money as a way of almost abdicating your responsibility, your personal responsibility. So I've kind of done my bit. I don't really want to come and spend time with you, but I'll pay for a counselling appointment for you. It's like when actually what they really need is a friend. So it's more the attitude of your heart. Generosity is about an outward focus. It's moving beyond the individualism that says, and this defensive way of living that says, I've just got to look after myself and make sure I'm going okay. It's actually saying, no, actually, true generosity is saying, I actually exist. My purpose in life has to do with the positive effect that I'm meant to have on the lives of other people, and an engagement with that. And so it is a real caring for other people, and therefore a sensitivity to what they actually need. So, in a lot of cases, it's not like people have enough. So, like reactive financial generosity is not what they need. What they need actually is someone to empower them and walk with them to actually help them become more productive people, for example. So it's the old thing, and you see this a lot with the way that development is done, poverty development is done. It's not a matter of handing out money. Actually, it's about getting alongside people, journeying with them, and empowering people to be productive, so and to come to wholeness. And that's actually a big investment of time, big investment of concern, care, because what really empowers and blesses people is love, and so you can't, there's no substitute for that. You can't just give money because that's not going to change them. Money doesn't change people. What changes people are people who love them. Yeah. That's what is really going to change and transform the lives of people. So generosity needs to be seen within that context. But certainly, I mean, the principle in the Proverbs is that a stingy person will never have enough.
Yeah.
And this idea that actually when you are generous, you will gain even more. Because the wisdom of the Proverbs is that when it comes to money is very much that of if you're obsessed about money and money is like your God, then you're actually going to have a very dysfunctional relationship with it, and you're not going to be able to have the kind of objectivity that's going to allow you to make wise choices. Yeah. I mean, this is how practical the Proverbs really are. So, but if we have this attitude that money isn't the be all and end all, it's not what I set my heart on. I'm generous with and open-handed with my money. And I'm saying to myself, I have enough, I'm content. Then actually you have the right attitude to be really wise with your money as well. And you can be patient. You can go the long haul with your investment. You're not in a hurry to get more and more and more, which often leads to poverty. I mean, the Proverbs talk about haste leading to poverty. Yes. And the haste that it's talking about is quickly, I've got to get rich because all my happiness depends on it. Now, actually, a content person is far more likely to be successful. And it's funny, I've seen that. I've seen people get wealthy very quickly and go back to bankruptcy as quickly.
Just as quickly.
Whereas those people who I think lifelong are most prosperous often have a much better attitude to money. In fact, the classic example of this book that I read, and I can't remember who it's by, where one of these get-rich gurus, how to be wealthy and prosperous, actually talks about this. You need to establish the right attitude to your money. And he advocated giving away at least 10% of your money. Yeah. Because in doing that, you say to yourself, I have enough. Yes. And so you establish the right kind of attitude towards your money. So that's kind of that's where that everything comes down to your attitude. Yes. In these things, and that goes for how you relate to your money, but most of all how you relate to people, and that gets back to Chris's question.
So that's great. And I know Chris will love that discussion there. So when we read a lot about work, effort, finances, riches, and poverty, because it's a major theme in this section of Proverbs, is it correct to read it and say, this is just talking about finances, riches, money in the bank? Or when he's talking about poverty and wealth, is he talking about something more than just money? Is there a correct way to do it? Because I've heard people really spiritualize this. Okay, poverty is spiritual poverty and without God, and riches is, and I'm like, well, what did Solomon mean by that? Was Solomon just giving practical financial advice to his sons, or was he talking about something more?
This is going to sound really unspiritual, but in a way he kind of is. Yeah. This is just good advice because it's how things work. And like in one sense, but it's more than just doing things to get good outcomes. It's about character development as well. So it's about being a diligent person, a patient person, a person who applies wisdom. And if you have wisdom, then it's going to apply to every part of life, and it's going to benefit you in every part of life. You're going to make better decisions. You're going to have better attitudes, and so this patience and this perseverance and this willingness to work hard and all of these things that should be the fruits of a good attitude are going to are going to give you a much better chance of being a prosperous person, all things being equal. Okay. Now, the world isn't isn't a world characterized primarily by justice, I'm afraid. So bad things happen in the world, and we get robbed, and markets crash, and people do, so it's all sorts of terrible things happen in this world. So it's not, as you said before, it's not like a law that applies in every situation, but it's a general principle that when we attain these right attitudes, willingness to persevere, work hard, be patient, apply prudence, then we're going to be more productive people in general.
Okay, one question that popped up for me while I was going through the book of Proverbs was, and there's been a couple of news stories as we've been recording this, and it's a news story that pops up quite often in this day and age, and usually with different political bents, and we won't go into it, but in the most simple way, there's a bit of a movement to say, the future. And they love to roll out different excuses, and it's been a common thing. Like in the future, robots are going to replace, human beings with working, and working is going to get, less and less and less. And work is downplay. The concept of working for your sustenance is like, that's old hat. We need to move into a new paradigm where the government supplies everybody with a wage, and everybody gets a basic living wage. And no matter what you do, no matter what you want to do, you can then have that, and everybody is equal in that way. And there's something about that, just recently hearing that again while I'm reading Proverbs, that goes, are we trying to rewire the fabric of the universe here? Is this going against what Proverbs is talking about?
Yeah, that's a really interesting. Seriously, this is a topic for a doctoral thesis or something. I mean, really, I mean that, because this is a really interesting, because I have heard that. And in fact, there's a couple of books that I've read. One is called, I never remember the names of books. One like the fourth, it's like the fourth revolution, or the fourth.
We'll look at that later.
And actually, I also read, there's a book by Al Gore just simply called The Future, where he discusses these sorts of things. And so it's a view that's out there that there will, that maybe there'll be a time when more, this idea that machines are going to put people out of work, and this book that I read that I can't remember the name of, was making the argument that, yes, it'll probably mean that there won't be as many jobs, but that's not such a bad thing, because things will be more readily available and cheaper, and people will have more access. And it really takes away from this idea of the value of work in itself. And actually, I think there is something about work and productivity as people, about producing something, the satisfaction that comes from producing something that is really valid. I think that's an important part of who we are. In fact, in some senses, I think even Karl Marx got that right when he talked about the importance of the worker not being alienated from their work, having the satisfaction of producing something and being able to look at what I've produced, whereas he dealt with this issue of alienation in the factories in the Industrial Revolution, where people would be making one little part of, and there was no satisfaction in their work. And I think he addressed a valid psychological issue when it comes to work, that there was no kind of value. It took away the value of just work, because I think he very much felt that, work is a part of humanity, and we draw a lot of satisfaction. I think he had a point in that. I don't agree with Karl Marx and everything that he said, but you will be happy to know.
A lot of people say a lot of right,
But certainly from the Proverbs, like there is certainly this sense that that work can be a very satisfying thing, and is part of our humanity, and that really leisure shouldn't be seen as the ideal. That satisfaction in our work should be a goal, not the next holiday. And I think this gets us down to the key point, I think, of application behind what you're saying. We can tend to live for the holidays that are coming up. I'll just put up with my work, and I'll live for the holidays. Whereas actually I think God wants us to draw satisfaction from our work, satisfaction from being a blessing to our workplace, to the people around us, a satisfaction from being productive and doing a good job. Even if it's a little thankless, even if we don't get credited from that, God speaks to that and says, I see it, I recognize what you're doing. So that's an important kind of spiritual attitude that we need to adopt.
Yeah.
A much more positive one towards our work than the negativity of, I just hate my work and I live for the holidays. Well, leisure is not is not necessarily, I mean, of course we need leisure time.
Yeah.
Of course, but it's not, we shouldn't, that's not what we live for.
Yes. Yeah. The chief purpose of why we're here is not to have a holiday.
Yeah.
It's and it sort of goes in, and this is like the shadow behind reading Proverbs this time for me. Like there's like a shadow behind it, that it was set up by wisdom talking at the beginning, because it gets into this practical nitty-gritty about talking about work and effort and all that stuff. And if I just had that without the wisdom part at the beginning, I'd be like, this is pretty boring. Like, this is like, what is this about? Yeah. But there seems to be this shadow behind it saying, this is how you flesh it out practically in the day-to-day. And this is these are the minutiae of how you flesh out these bigger concepts.
Yeah. And I mean, you see that in the satisfaction that people get from planting gardens and it's not just about, I need to plant a garden because I need food, and the food, it's actually in some ways, I mean, food is pretty affordable, and I mean, planting a garden doesn't necessarily save you that much money, but people draw so much satisfaction from planting a garden and the satisfaction of raising these things, so there's something about this relationship that we have to the earth.
Yes.
Of work, it's like Adam and Eve working the garden. There's something so fundamental to our humanity. We were created to be the world's gardeners and caretakers, and so we draw immense satisfaction from that process of caretaking and gardening, and all our people who are passionate about the environment and so forth will all be saying, yea, verily, and amen. But that is true, that it's a core part of who we are, to work and draw the most out of this world.
So reading through it this time, and we'll wrap up with this, we're running out of time. If what's the takeaway for the modern human being? For most of us living in the West, and we've got the ability to listen to this podcast through technology, and we have more and more leisure time on our hands, and work is not the same sort of work that Solomon was talking about. And work, the definition of work changes all the time. One man's work is another man's holiday or hobby or anything like that.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway for us right now going through this part of Proverbs and all the financial work attitude ones? What would you have as takeaway from this point?
I think that the real takeaway is an attitude. It's an attitude towards what the task that we have before us. I mean, it's so easy just to be negative all the time. And in the time when the Proverbs were written, I mean, this was an agrarian society. They had to work really hard to just get food, right? And yet there's this positivity around work. This enjoyment in, you work hard, you enjoy the harvest. This relationship to this process of sowing and reaping, and you're part of this bigger thing. And so I think we're encouraged to have a better attitude towards the work that we have. And I know that there may be plenty of reasons why, there's really acrimonious workplaces, and but you know what, like even there, let's be positive about that, and positive about the positive influence that we can have in a really bad workplace. Even if everything is against us, this is an opportunity to apply our faith and to, there's so much opportunity to find purpose and satisfaction in the midst of our work. And I think the wisdom of the Proverbs is to instill that positive, diligent, persevering work.
Yeah.
So that it's not even about the physical outcome. It's about the attitudinal outcome. We become better people as a result.
I think we've lost part of the satisfaction, though, of it, because some of the work, and I find that, like, as in, I've sowed the seed. You know, we do all the stuff, and then look at this harvest. You know, there's that cyclical nature of what they were doing whether it was working with animals, that farm sort of mentality, or even some of the practical trade stuff that people do. You have a satisfaction. I put in the hard work, so I lay these bricks, bang, I've got a wall. But for those of us who work in different areas that of the mind or media or creative or all these different things, I tell you what, sometimes I have found myself reading through Proverbs again and saying, okay, God, I need to see a little bit. I feel like I'm sowing seeds. Yeah. Show me a little bit of what is happening. Yeah. And he's faithful, and he does.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I can remember actually when I was in the mid to late 90s, I worked as a teacher, as a classroom music teacher, and I was running this program. It was my own business, and I ran this music program in a number of schools, and I was really busy, you know, and it was quite intense as well. It was like full-time. It's sort of in between the studies, actually. I took a year off to develop this, a couple of years off full-time study to develop this business, and then I still sort of did that while I was studying at the same time. So I'm working flat out. I'm studying, you know, and I started to develop a really bad attitude towards, I'm so sick of this, and because it was quite intense and exhausting, and if I see another child again, I'm going to strangle him. It's like, you know, and I remember actually responding to the Proverbs, actually, and allowing the Proverbs to speak into that, first of all, to make me feel thankful that I even had work. I mean, I just started recognizing, well, you know, I have work. I have work, and encouraging me to feel satisfied about, you know, what I was doing, and I just remember recognizing the bad attitude that I had, and making a determined effort to get up in the morning, be thankful about the job that I had, and to say, for God's sake, and for my witness as a Christian, I'm going to put in my all, and I'm going to have a positive attitude, and, you know, making a real decision just to be positive and thankful, and I pray about my day, and it was the same job, you know, but it transformed the way that I saw that. And I think sometimes what we need is not a new job, but a new attitude toward our job. And if we, because often we can run away from that monotony, but a change of attitude does wonders for changing the situation that you're in.
Work, finances, satisfaction. It's funny how these principles that were written down thousands of years ago for the man and woman back then, are still applicable, probably more now than ever before, to us now. You know, like, these principles are still there. Now, I hope that you've gotten something out of what Matt and I have been talking about as we go through the book of Proverbs. Please, as we say every week, if you've got a question, keep on listening. Benita will let you know how you can get in touch with us, where you can find us online. But there's also a way to email us from our website. You can head over to thrivetoday.net.au, and you'll see a button there that says contact. You want to contact us there. It's pretty clear on how to do it. It's a way that you can get a hold of us directly with your questions, with your comments. We're always keen to hear from you, especially about the book of Proverbs, about this whole subject of wisdom. So make sure you take a hold of that over at the website. All right, well, we'll see you next week on another episode of Thrive Deeper. On behalf of Matt and Stu and all the gang, we say thank you so much for tuning in. See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to Thrive Deeper. We value all our listening community. If you are on Facebook, search and like Thrive Today page to get all of our latest updates. Join Join the conversation online with nearly 400 other listeners at facebook.com/groups/Thrive Deeper. Our home on the internet is at thrivetoday.net.au. There you can subscribe to the Thrive Daily Reading Guide and contact us directly. That's at thrivetoday.net.au. Our music is provided by the talented Rod Gear. For more information, head to rodgearmusic.com. The podcast is recorded at the studios of Geelong Christian Media Incorporated, then edited and produced by DJP.FM. Until next time, thrive.